What's up, guys? We're back with another episode of the Two Guys Talk Sports podcast presented by Mr. G's Podcast Productions. We're so excited to see the growing interest in the new podcast, so let's just dive right back into where we left off. This week, we're actually going to be introducing a new segment called Number of the Day, where we showcase an interesting number statistic that happened this week. This week, the number is 9, which is what University of Michigan defensive end Rashawn Gary got on the Wonderlic exam. So, to see how we compared to Rashawn Gary, Brendan and I took a sample Wonderlic exam. We actually scored a 45, which makes it all the more impressive considering a 10 is standard for literacy. So a little bit confusing as to how Rashawn Gary got into Michigan if he can't read, but that's besides the point. How'd you feel about the Wonderlic test, Brendan?
I thought it was pretty mentally draining and hard at times, but a 9? I mean, no one should be getting a 9 on this test. Especially someone coming out of U of M. So, I mean, maybe that tells you something, but...
One of the most impressive things that I found out about the test was that there are 5 options for each question, or for most of the questions. So you could actually guess on every single question and get a better score than Rashawn Gary did.
Yeah, that's hard to believe. And there was a couple questions that had a do not know answer, and I just don't know who would ever click on that one. But besides the point, let's get into it. NHL and NBA playoffs have been underway for quite some time now, and the second round pictures for each are becoming a little more clear, with only a few deciding games remaining. So we'll get you right into that and give you our insight on both of those second round matchups.
We also want to bring back the hot topic of discussion, which we touched on last time, which is who had the better legacy between Paul Pierce and Dwyane Wade.
But that's enough from us with the intro. So now Oliver is going to take us through the NBA follow-up segment.
So the first series that we covered was Bucks Pistons, and we said the Bucks would win in 5. Milwaukee actually ended up sweeping this series 4-0. What do you have to think about that?
I mean, the Bucks really didn't have any trouble with this series, as we assumed. Giannis took over. Blake Griffin was hurt. It was really just it was over before it started for the Bucks with this one.
Yeah, I thought it was quite impressive how hard Blake Griffin played those final 2 games, basically on one leg. 22 points in Game 4 really showed how much heart he has and how much he wanted to get the Detroit City a win. The next series that we covered was Raptors Magic. We said that the Raptors would win in 4, and basically like we predicted, besides a small falling out that they had in Game 1, the Raptors had no trouble in this series. Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry, Pascal Siakam, too talented, overpowered this Magic team.
Yeah, DJ Augustine won that one game for them, but then other than that, Raptors just took over the series as we expected. Next up, we had the Sixers versus the Nets. We were a little wrong in this one. We projected the Nets in 7, so Oliver, what do you think about this series?
I think a lot of our prediction hinged on Joel Embiid missing some time, and he actually did miss Game 3, I believe it was, but the Sixers really had no trouble without him. Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, Ben Simmons, all legitimate stars in the NBA. And they're just too many stars for the Nets to handle. The Nets really only have D'Angelo Russell.
Don't forget about Jared Dudley. Really big influence in that series. Maybe got the Sixers a little angry, and I don't know if it helped his team too much.
The final series in the Eastern Conference, anyway, was the Celtics versus the Pacers. And we said that the Celtics would have a little bit of trouble, but ultimately win in 6 games. They surprised us a little bit and swept the Pacers. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, Celtics came out hot. They proved the doubters wrong. I mean, this was the Indiana Pacers team without Victor Oladipo, so you can't expect anything more for the Celtics other than a sweep. Came out strong, finished out the series, and now they're getting ready to face a tough Bucks squad next round.
Our first series in the Western Conference was the Warriors versus the Clippers. We said Warriors in 4. Currently, they're leading 3-1. I believe that they're going to win this series, and I think that besides, similar to the Raptors, they blew one game with that, I believe it was a 31-point lead. Really can't see the Warriors losing this series. Too talented, as we said previously.
Yeah, Patrick Beverley may have worn off on Kevin Durant. I don't think he's very much afraid of him anymore, so that series is kind of over.
Our next series is the Nuggets versus the Spurs. We said that the Nuggets would win this series in 6 games, which is definitely still a possibility. They're up 3-2 right now. And I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with this one. The Nuggets are a team that's really young, inexperienced in the playoffs, but also really talented. And they have had some growing pains. They dropped 2 games to the Spurs. But I think where you really saw the series turn around was, I believe it was game 2 or 3, when Jamal Murray essentially put the team on his back, won them pretty crucial home game. And that was really, I think, the turning point for this Nuggets squad. They've really turned it up the last few games, and I think that they're going to beat the Spurs.
Yeah, I think they're going to be able to close this one out in 6. They're just taking over the series right now. The Spurs are definitely showing signs of life, but I think the Nuggets are going to come out on top.
Our third series in the Western Conference is the Trailblazers versus the Thunder. We said that the Thunder were going to win in 6, that the Blazers just have this playoff monkey on their back, in a sense. They proved us wrong. Damian Lillard has played really well the entire series. Last night he shot 17 for 33 and 10 from 18 from 3. He finished with 50 points, including a 37-foot game winner over Paul George.
Yeah, Paul George's valiant effort wasn't enough in this game. He finished with 36 points and shot 14 from 20 from the field, but I mean, Damian Lillard just took over. This one is a perfect display of Dame time, scored 50, put the series to sleep.
I think one of the biggest storylines from this series was Damian Lillard versus Russell Westbrook, the battle of the two number zeros. I think that Russell Westbrook showed why he isn't considered the best point guard in the league, because he really just can't shoot the ball. He had, I think, 20 missed field goals last night. The rest of the Thunder had 19 combined. And when you're shooting the ball that much and you're not making any of them, you're putting your team at such a disadvantage, and I think we really saw that this series especially.
Yeah, Damian Lillard definitely proved to be the better point guard in this series against a tough Thunder squad, and Russell Westbrook and the Thunder are getting home early again.
Our final series in the Western Conference is the Rockets versus the Jazz, and I believe we said that the Rockets were going to take this series in 4 or 5 games. Right now they're up 3-1 in the series. And what do you think about this one? How has the Jazz strategy of stopping James Harden worked out for them?
Not too hot. Donovan Mitchell did come out a little bit at the end of the last game to get them that one win, but other than that, I can't really see this Jazz team coming back from a 3-0 all the way to win this in 7 games. So I think maximum Rockets in 6 games.
I would have to agree with that. I think that when you have a leader who's only in his second season in the NBA, it's really challenging to come out and actually defeat a team that has the MVP, another really talented veteran in Chris Paul, Clint Capella. I just really can't see the Jazz winning that series. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through the second round matchups. And to do that, we've brought in a special guest, John Stout, to talk with us about some of these matchups.
What's up, guys?
So our first matchup is Bucks-Celtics.
John, what do you think about this one?
So, you guys brought me on here for extremely hot takes only, so I'm saying Celtics in 4. Milwaukee, they've been doing it all season, but the Celtics are really coming around. They proved that last series and definitely going to get 4 games this one.
I don't know if I definitely agree with that, John, just because Milwaukee does have a very strong MVP candidate in Giannis Antetokounmpo.
I'll go full Tanya Harding. I don't care.
And so Giannis struggled during the Detroit series a little bit, wasn't able to make some of his shots that he usually does. I think that if the Celtics can put a guy like Al Horford on him, shut him down, the series is going to be relatively easy for them. I think that 2 guys that I really look at as X factors in this series are Gordon Hayward and Jaylen Brown, 2 guys that have kind of been up and down all year. And you saw that when they were hot during the Indiana series, the Celtics looked like an unbeatable team. I think that on the other side of that, Eric Bledsoe and Nikola Mirotic are 2 guys on the Bucks who are really going to be X factors for them. Last year you saw Terry Rozier pretty much annihilate Eric Bledsoe for the whole 7 games that series went. You have guys like Giannis as well as Chris Middleton, who you kind of know what you're going to get from them night in and night out. But I think that Eric Bledsoe, especially, as well as Nikola Mirotic, are going to be 2 guys that really are going to win or lose the series for the Bucks.
Yeah, depending on each team's other options, not their first go-to options, this series could be anything from 4 to 7 games. So we can see these 2 teams dish it out coming up in this round. Next up, we have the Raptors versus the Philadelphia 76ers. John, what do you think about that one?
The Sixers, I'm never the one to like the Sixers, so I'm definitely going Raptors here, but how many games? Honestly, I'm looking 5 games, I think the Sixers are going to choke. They always have, so that's where I'm going. 5 games.
Relatively along the same lines, I'm going to say Raptors in 6. Both teams did lose 1 game in the first round. but I wouldn't expect the same in the second series. Everyone's got some playoff experience under their belts now, and they're ready to go. You have guys like Kawhi Leonard, Pascal Siakam on the Raptors, Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid on the Sixers, who are great defenders, all defensive NBA players. And I think one battle that I'm really looking at is Kyle Lowry against Ben Simmons, just because Ben Simmons was able to lock down D'Angelo Russell for the back end of that Nets series, and Kyle Lowry also has had some struggles early on in the playoffs this year. I think that Joel Embiid's knee is another factor that we definitely should watch. But I think that one guy who could really have a great series, a coming out party of sorts, is Tobias Harris. He's a guy who's an all-star, but kind of flies under the radar, especially on a star-studded Sixers roster. And I think another guy that I really like is Pascal Siakam. Plays with a lot of hustle, a lot of heart. I think that he can be a spark plug for the Raptors and maybe get them a couple games.
Yeah, I think this series is almost a little different than the Celtics series in a way that neither of these teams have much of a bench coming off to relieve the starters. So we're going to have to see almost a shootout between the stars, like you said, Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry, Pascal Siakam versus Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid. So we should be in store for another good series. But I'm going to agree with you with Raptors in 6.
Our third series, one that I'm personally really excited for, is another rematch of the Rockets and the Warriors. John, what are you thinking?
You know, I know you guys are both Rockets guys, but I'm thinking, honestly, we're talking about the Warriors here. The Warriors. You know, I'm saying Warriors in 6.
I don't know, John. You're kind of labeling me as a Rockets guy when in truth, I hate James Harden. So Oliver says Rockets in 6. I say Warriors in 7. This should be a fun series. I mean, we've seen it before. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green versus James Harden, Chris Paul, Eric Gordon, Clint Capella.
Did you say James Harden?
Did I say James Harden? I did say
Don't
James
forget
Harden.
about James
Don't
Harden.
forget
He's
about
one guy you definitely can't write off in this series.
Yeah, I think he's kind of good from what I've heard.
So for me, I really can't see. I mean, the Warriors are a talented roster, but I think they're going to be missing DeMarcus Cousins, who's one of their better big men. And I also think that guys like Klay Thompson really struggled a lot during the year, during the playoffs as well. And honestly, I think that the 31-point loss to the Clippers, while it may be a fluke, was pretty embarrassing. It shows that Golden State is vulnerable this year, and they haven't been in years past in the same way. I think that Harden had one rough game against the Jazz so far, a couple of fantastic games during that series as well. And I think that if he can get hot, the Rockets are going to lean on him just like they have all year. And I think that this was a team that took the Warriors to 6 or 7 games last year in the Western Conference semifinal. And I don't see anything different happening this year. I think this series is going to go deep, but I think the Rockets are going to take it.
I think realistically, neither of us want either of these teams in the finals, though. So let's just put it at that.
Our final series in the West is the Portland Trail Blazers against either the San Antonio Spurs or the Denver Nuggets. I'm going to go ahead and say that I think the Nuggets are going to be the second team in this series. John, what do you think?
I'm thinking the Nuggets don't stand a chance in the second round. Honestly, I'm thinking Blazers maybe in probably 5 games. I'm saying, maybe they'll squeak out a sweep, but I'm not looking for the Nuggets to win.
It's a bold prediction there. I mean, like you said, extremely hot takes only. But Oliver and I conferred, and I think we can both agree Blazers in 6 or 7. The Nuggets team, very talented. But then as you see this Blazers team coming off a very hot series versus the Thunder. So what do you think, Oliver?
I think at the moment, Damian Lillard, most entertaining player to watch in the league. I really would love to see him go off in another series. Hopefully they can take down guys like Jamal Murray. I don't know if he really has what it takes to be a playoff star. I think Nikola Jokic is a guy that's really going to have to step up if the Nuggets want to make a run. I also think Blazers in 7. So that actually wraps up our NBA second round segment. Thank you, John. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
No
We'll
problem.
definitely have you back for the third round. Sticking with the playoffs, we're now going to get into a second round preview of the NHL playoffs. Brendan, you want to start us off?
All right, so in the Western Conference, we have the St. Louis Blues versus the Dallas Stars. I have St. Louis in 6. So after doubting them in the first round versus a tough Winnipeg team, I believe this blue team may be the real deal. Anchored by a star goalie in Jordan Binnington, I believe the Blues have enough talent overall to win another series, even though they'll have their hands full with Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn's Stars team. Plus, interim head coach for the Blues, Craig Berube, continues to impress, and Jaden Schwartz is also emerging as a star at the right time. So it should be another good series for the Blues.
I also have St. Louis 6 games. I think that while Winnipeg is a really good team, maybe they're not at the same talent level as a Stars team or even the Nashville Predators, who the Stars had to play. So I think this will be a slightly more challenging, especially like you said with Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, two guys who are really talented, legitimate stars in the league. But I think that St. Louis is playing some of their best hockey right now, and I don't see that letting up. So I think St. Louis in 6.
Next up in the West, we have the Colorado Avalanche versus the San Jose Sharks. Another very tough decision for me, but I'm going to take the Avalanche in 6 or 7. So Colorado stunned the hockey world with a win over the Calgary Flames in only 5 games after losing Game 1 4-0. And I believe that the tandem of Gabriel Landeskog and Nathan MacKinnon alongside goalie Grubauer and net will be enough to power through in 6 or 7 games versus a tough Shark squad who just exhausted themselves after coming back from a 3-1 deficit against the Golden Knights.
So, heading into yesterday when the Sharks played Game 7 against the Golden Knights, I said Avs in 6. I'm now going to flip that. I think that the Sharks are going to win this in 7 games. I think that coming back from a 3-1 deficit and being 3 goals down, I believe it was, in the third period of Game 7, coming back from that just shows that you have a lot of heart and that they're talented enough that they can do something like that. It shows that they're a legitimate threat, and especially when they have their backs against the wall, which is a very likely possibility against this Avs team. I think they showed that they have the talent, they have the will to really come back and do some damage against this Colorado squad.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be another series to watch. Moving over to the Eastern Conference, we have the Bruins versus the Columbus Blue Jackets. What do you think about this one, Oliver?
I said that the Blue Jackets, unfortunately, I think are going to win this in 7 games. They had the upset of the playoffs. They beat the President's Trophy winner, Tampa Bay Lightning. That Lightning team was, in my opinion, by far the scariest in the playoffs. And the Columbus not only beat them, they did it in 4 games. That to me shows that this Columbus team should be considered a real threat. And I think the Bruins looked great last night. They played hard the whole time. Tuukka Rask stood on his head. But at the same time, when you watch that Game 5, that was one of the most embarrassing games of hockey that I've seen the Bruins play in a very long time. They weren't really getting good shots. They looked lazy, tired. I just think that the Blue Jackets have too much.
I think this series is going to be another good one. I mean, obviously, I'm biased, but I'm going to say the Bruins in 6. They just finished an absolute battle with the Maple Leafs, and I think they can carry that Game 7 momentum right into this series. Blues, like we said, upset of the playoffs, beat the President's Trophy champions, left the 62-win Tampa Bay Lightning stunned. They caught the Lightning sleeping. I hope they're going to prepare for the Bruins. I hope the Bruins are going to prepare for them. Should be another great series. Lastly, we have the Islanders, and they will be playing the Game 7 winner between the Capitals or the Hurricanes. What do you think about this series?
Touching back on the Blue Jackets series a little bit, but this also applies for the Islanders. The Blue Jackets and the Islanders both won these series in 4 games. To me, shows that they're going to be rested, which is something that is good for some teams, not so great for others. When you're a team that's hot, you maybe don't like to cool down and have all that time off. But when you're a team that's kind of banged up, a little tired, it's really nice to have an extra week off where you're just sitting around waiting for your next opponent. That being said, I think that the Islanders are one of those teams that's really benefited from the rest. At the same time, though, I think that the Capitals have Alexander Ovechkin, and besides him are just a really talented team from top to bottom. I think that the Capitals can beat the Islanders probably 6 games.
I'm going to flip the switch and say Islanders in 7 versus either the Capitals or the Hurricanes. Keep in mind that series is not over yet. Islanders team cruised past the star-studded Penguins lineup in round 1. They completed the easy sweep. So whether they face off against a gritty Carolina team or the favored returning champions in Washington, I think the Isles can carry their momentum and fight their way into the Eastern Conference Finals.
That's an interesting take. I really just can't see Washington losing to the Hurricanes. I think the Hurricanes are a good team, but I think the Capitals are a lot better. And there are very few people in the NHL that I'd rather have in a Game 7 than Alexander Ovechkin.
Couldn't agree more.
So our last segment of the day, we're going to be touching on the Paul Pierce versus Dwyane Wade question of who had a better career or legacy. Because Paul Pierce went on ESPN and he said that he thinks that he had a better career, a better legacy. And he also said, which is something that I think many people have discounted, that if he had LeBron or Shaq in the prime of his career, he thinks he could have as many championships as Dwyane Wade at least, but possibly 2 or 3 more, leaving him with 5 or 6 rings.
Yeah, I mean, this discussion can go on as long as you want to carry it. Pierce was a dynamic force throughout his career, appearing as one of the most skilled wings in the league, thriving as a playmaker, using his blend of talent, strength, and basketball IQ to make much of an impact as his more athletic counterparts such as LeBron and others. Meanwhile, Wade played his final season this year, one of the most successful and beloved players of all time, amassing dozens of honors and awards that commemorate his success and his storied 16-season career. This debate, let's get into it.
So I think that when Pierce made these comments, he really came off as resentful towards Dwyane Wade. And I think that that's kind of unfortunate because they're both obviously great players, both going to be Hall of Famers. But I think that the guy that Pierce should really be resenting is Danny Ainge. For the majority of Wade's career, he had a sidekick or even someone who was better than him. He played with Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron James, Chris Bosh. You saw the front office bring in guys to help Dwyane Wade, especially in the prime of his career. On the opposite side of that, Paul Pierce's teammates in his prime were guys like Sebastian Telfair, Al Jefferson, who turned out to be pretty good, just not on the Celtics, and Delonte West. Then, towards the end of his career, you saw Danny Ainge get him guys like Rondo, get him guys like Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett. But at that point, it was almost too little too late. He had already kind of expended the prime of his career. And so that's where I think that there's a difference, I guess, in terms of playing.
Yeah, the big question in this one is, who did Pierce really play with in his prime? I mean, he didn't have any big names like Shaq, LeBron, or Bosh. And he was already 30 when KG was acquired. So the ultimate argument in this one is, if you give Pierce a team equipped with LeBron James and Bosh in his prime, then he'd be sitting on at least 3 championships, just like Dwyane Wade.
And I would have to agree with that. I think another interesting comment that came out of this was Dwyane Wade's son, Zaire Wade, who said that, or made a comment that the Celtics were knocked out of the playoffs by the Heat. But during Dwyane Wade's best season, which was his 2009 to 2010 season, he finished 3rd in the MVP voting. The Celtics beat the Heat in 5 games. One interesting thing about that series is Dwyane Wade didn't have LeBron James, Chris Bosh, Shaquille O'Neal. He was on his own.
So that series maybe raises a question, could Wade do it without the help or support of those all-time players like we just mentioned?
I think it's kind of interesting, but at the same time, like we've just been talking about, playing with good teammates elevates your stats. I think that having guys like LeBron and Shaq especially, I don't think Chris Bosh as much, but having 2 legitimate great players, it draws defenses away from you, and it gives you a lot of open looks. And so I think that is definitely one thing that you can't necessarily equate those two. One stat that really stood out to me was the all-defensive teams, just because that is something that is completely individual, and that shows that Dwyane Wade is a better defender than Paul Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, awards mean stuff to individual players, but you can't really compare these two on a scale like that, just depending on teammates, when they did it, how they did it. It's all just, I mean, it's a hard argument. Let's keep going. A big thing that I noticed was Paul Pierce stayed in the NBA as long as he could, which, I mean, somewhat tainted his stats in the end and his overall view. Whereas Wade said this year he could play more years, but he's walking away by choice. Thus, he received a nice farewell tour. What are your thoughts on that?
I think one thing that really hurt Paul Pierce in the end was that he was still playing under Doc Rivers in Los Angeles. I think that he had one pretty solid, underrated year with the Wizards where he was in the playoffs. I think he hit 2 game winners in the first round, and then he proceeded to go to Los Angeles where Doc Rivers didn't really play him that much, and he wasn't fed the ball like Dwyane Wade was, where you saw towards the end he was getting 20 points a night, pretty much just being force-fed the rock, taking a lot of shots, and getting some points. I think that Paul Pierce played 3 more seasons than Dwyane Wade ended up playing, and so he's obviously older at the end of his career. That, I think, kind of changed people's end view of him. I think one really obvious thing you could point out is that Wade finished his career with a triple-double, and Paul Pierce finished his career in a game where he played 2 minutes and scored 0 points.
Yeah, it's definitely tainted legacy, but I mean, if he walked out when he chose to, then maybe we'd be having a different discussion, but as we know, he waited those extra couple years, and he just loved the game of basketball so much he wanted to stay with. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but to end this note on the Dwyane Wade, Paul Pierce date, Ray Allen actually came out and gave his opinion on this, and a quote from him is, he said, "What we have to get away from is trying to pit this player against that player and look at each player individually and marvel at their impact on the league and appreciate who they are." I think that's a very strong quote from Ray Allen, a teammate to Paul Pierce and Dwyane Wade. He understands both their legacies. They're both great players, both all-timers, and obviously he doesn't want to choose a side in this, but we're never going to know. This debate can go on forever, but where we can leave it is that Paul Pierce and Dwyane Wade are both all-time NBA greats.
I would have to agree with that. They're both probably going to be first ballot Hall of Famers. I would say, in response to Pierce's claim that he would have 5 or 6 rings, I think that from what we've seen, that's definitely a valid point, though.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in to episode number 2 of the Two Guys Talk Sports podcast, presented by Mr. G's Podcast Productions. I'm Brendan Hynes with Oliver Canning, and we'll leave you on that note. We'll see you next episode.